Chapter 13, Section 4. The Roman Catholic Church Faces Crisis. A. The Papacy at Avignon and the Great Schism. During the Middle Ages, the papacy played an important role in politics and in the development of organized nations. The medieval popes were political leaders who ruled over large territories in Italy, as well as religious leaders. The powerful influence of the Roman Catholic Church meant that the popes could help or hurt kings and emperors. From Rome to Avignon. Since the days of the early Christian Church, Rome had been a symbol for Christians. Over time, the Bishop of Rome became the most powerful bishop and worldwide leader of the Church. In 1309, a French pope, Clement V, moved the seat of the papacy from Rome to Avignon in France to avoid civil wars in Italy. 2 new palaces were built for the popes, who remained in Avignon until 1377. There were 7 popes during this time, and all of them were French. The Great Schism. Pope Gregory XI returned the papacy to Rome in 1377. He died a year later. The cardinals, the high-ranking church officials, elected an Italian pope, Urban VI. Urban soon proved to be unruly and cruel. The cardinals declared his election invalid and elected a French candidate, Clement VII. Urban refused to resign, and Clement retreated to Avignon. For the next 40 years, the church was divided by the Great Schism, in which a succession of rival popes claimed authority. The popes at Avignon are sometimes called anti-popes because they were not recognized as real popes by many Roman Catholics. France, Sicily, and parts of Spain supported the popes at Avignon. However, most of the rest of Europe, including England and Ireland, supported the popes in Rome. Starting in 1417, a group of church leaders met in Constance, Switzerland, to discuss church unity. They brought the separate papacies together at the meeting called the Council of Constance. The leaders elected Martin V as the one pope to unify the papacy. The Council of Constance established that a general council of the whole church had authority that even popes had to obey. B. Internal tensions grow. The medieval Roman Catholic Church was the most powerful institution in Europe. During the 12th and 13th centuries, the Church was at the height of its political, social, and philosophical influence. For most of the Middle Ages, believers were willing to accept whatever the Church taught. This began to change in the High Middle Ages. By the 14th century, critics began to question Church teachings and practices. John Wycliffe calls for reforms. Before the Great Schism, the most serious internal conflict among Christians had been the split between Rome and Constantinople in 1054. The Patriarch, or leading bishop of Constantinople, had refused to acknowledge the authority of the Pope in Rome. As a result, 2 branches of Christianity developed: the Western European Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox churches. At the same time that the Great Schism was dividing Roman Catholics, John Wycliffe, an English teacher and priest, criticized many church teachings and practices. Wycliffe, like some earlier critics, objected to the wealth of many members of the clergy, including the Pope. Wycliffe argued that the Bible, not the church or its officials, was the highest source of religious authority. He felt that people should be able to read and interpret the Bible for themselves. Church officials accused Wycliffe of being a heretic, someone who publicly expresses beliefs that differ from the official teachings of the Roman Catholic Church. The English royal court protected him, so he was not executed like many others of that time. Besides his arguments on faith, Wycliffe also helped launch the first translation of the Latin Bible into English. The result was that many more people could read the Bible and decide for themselves what it said. In England, followers of John Wycliffe called themselves Lollards and spread the belief that individuals ought to be able to interpret the Bible for themselves. The Lollards also criticized the wealth of the clergy. The Lollards posed such a threat to established interests that England denounced the reformers as heretics and introduced the death penalty for heresy in 1401. A Lollard uprising was harshly put down in 1414, and the Lollards were driven into hiding. Challenges to the Church. Wycliffe's ideas also influenced the Czech religious reformer Jan Hus. At the University of Prague in present-day Czech Republic, where he studied and taught, Hus called for a reform of church practices. Hus objected particularly to the church's sale of indulgences. For many years, the church allowed people to buy an indulgence instead of doing penance to gain forgiveness for their sins. Penance could involve praying for many hours or days, giving all of one's possession to poor people, or even going on a crusade. Many people were happy to buy an indulgence instead of doing a penance, and the church was happy to take their money. Hus felt this practice was not in keeping with church teachings. When the Archbishop of Prague burned John Wycliffe's writings, Hus strongly protested. Conflicts with the church and the king forced him to leave Prague in 1412. 2 years later, the Council of Constance condemned Hus as a heretic. He was burned to death at the stake in 1415. John Wycliffe, the Lollards, and Jan Hus all raised important issues that challenged Roman Catholic teachings and authority. For a while, the Church was successful in resisting efforts at reform. However, calls for reform in the Church continued to spread in the early 1500s. Wycliffe, the Lollards, and Hus led the calls for church reform. Their ideas survived, and other reformers took up the same demands. End of reading.